The fact that you're reading these words right now isn't random. Something fundamental has already shifted. Not something that might happen, not something you're working toward. Something that's already complete. You've stepped across an invisible boundary. Your consciousness has made a leap. And this message appearing in your awareness at this precise moment is the first signal confirming what's already occurred. This isn't poetry. This isn't spiritual metaphor. This is how consciousness actually works. In quantum mechanics, we observe that subatomic particles don't gradually slide between energy levels. They absorb specific amounts of energy and then suddenly jump, instantaneously. One moment occupying one state, the next moment appearing in an entirely different configuration with no gradual transition between. No slow climb, just a discontinuous leap from here to there. And that's exactly what just happened to your awareness. Not in your body, but in the fabric of your consciousness itself. You didn't gradually evolve into what you are right now. You quantum leaped. Here's how you can verify this isn't just conceptual. You can sense it directly. Right now, as these words move through your awareness, something about your perception feels different, more alert, more present, more spacious than it was yesterday or even an hour ago. Maybe colors seem to carry more depth. Maybe sounds have a richer texture. Maybe your relationship to time itself feels altered. These aren't subtle hints you need to search for. These are unmistakable shifts in how reality is registering through you. Have you felt it? In the last day or two, maybe 3 days maximum, something changed. You might not be able to pinpoint the exact moment of transition, but you know with certainty that something is fundamentally different now. The external world appears unchanged, but your experience of that world has transformed. Like you've been perceiving everything through a specific lens your entire life, and suddenly someone replaced that lens while you were looking away. The switch happened so smoothly, you missed the moment of exchange. This is the signature of quantum state transitions in consciousness. Niels Bohr, one of the architects of quantum theory, discovered that electrons don't gradually drift between orbital levels. They vanish from one level and instantaneously materialize at another level. No journey, no gradual movement, just discontinuous transformation. Your awareness operates through the same quantum principles. You don't slowly become more conscious. You quantum leap into expanded states of awareness. But here's what makes this particular moment so significant. Quantum jumps don't occur randomly. They require precise conditions. The system must absorb exactly the right quantum of energy. The timing must align perfectly. The surrounding quantum field must support the transition. You didn't accidentally stumble into this expanded state. Everything you've experienced, every challenge you've faced, every moment of growth you've lived through has been constructing the exact conditions necessary for this quantum leap to become possible. And now it's happened. Now you're operating from a frequency you weren't operating from before. The reason this message found you, the reason these specific words are resonating in your consciousness with a quality of confirmation rather than discovery, is because your new quantum state is tuned to different frequencies than your previous state. You're now sensitive to information that matches your current position, not your former position. This message couldn't have reached you earlier. Your previous frequency wouldn't have resonated with these patterns, but your current frequency pulled this directly into your field of experience. Ancient mystery traditions called these moments initiations, sudden thresholds where the seeker crosses a boundary and cannot return to their previous understanding. Modern neuroscience describes similar phenomena as cortical reorganization, moments when neural networks suddenly reconfigure into new patterns of processing. Quantum physics names it a state transition, different languages pointing to the same fundamental truth. You've changed at a level deeper than behavior or belief. You've changed at the level of your fundamental operating system. And if you're still here, if something in you is recognizing this as accurate rather than questioning whether it could be accurate, that's your new quantum state confirming its own existence to itself. Your previous state would immediately doubt. Your previous state would demand external proof. Your previous state would ask, "How can I be certain this is real?" But your current state knows. Not through logical deduction, not through external evidence, but through direct recognition. And this knowing, this certainty that doesn't require proof, is itself confirmation that the quantum leap has already completed. You've been noticing something extraordinary these past few days, haven't you? Experiences that didn't quite fit your normal framework of understanding. Things that made you wonder if something profound was shifting beneath the surface. And you were correct. These weren't random glitches. These were symptoms of your consciousness transitioning into a higher quantum configuration. First, you likely experienced an intense wave of exhaustion, followed by unexpected clarity. Perhaps a day or two where you felt completely depleted, where your body insisted on rest, where you couldn't push through with your usual willpower. And then seemingly overnight, you woke feeling fundamentally different. Not merely rested, but transformed. More present, more aware, more alive. This wasn't ordinary fatigue and recovery. This was your nervous system upgrading its capacity to conduct higher frequencies. Dr. Valerie Hunt's research on human energy fields demonstrates that major consciousness shifts are preceded by temporary phases of nervous system overload. Your body essentially goes offline to integrate new frequencies of information. And when it comes back online, it's operating at an enhanced capacity. That exhaustion you experienced wasn't depletion, it was integration. Your entire system was reorganizing itself around a new quantum baseline. You may have also noticed a curious sense of detachment from your usual concerns. Things that previously stressed you suddenly feel less urgent. Dramas that used to capture your attention now seem trivial. Worries that used to dominate your thinking have simply dissolved. This isn't apathy or disconnection. This is your consciousness shifting to a vantage point where you can perceive the temporary nature of things that previously felt permanent and solid. When you operate from a higher quantum state, you naturally perceive from a more expanded perspective. It's like moving from ground level to a mountaintop. All the details that seemed enormous from ground level reveal themselves as small from the elevated view. You haven't stopped caring about what matters. You've started seeing from a frequency where what truly matters becomes obvious, and what doesn't truly matter stops draining your energy. Have you been experiencing moments of unexpected joy or peace without external cause? Not because something positive happened in your circumstances, but spontaneous elevations of mood that seem to arise from nowhere. These aren't mood swings or emotional fluctuations. These are your consciousness naturally resonating at the frequency of your new quantum state, which is inherently more peaceful, more joyful, more expansive than the state you were operating from previously. The ancient yogic traditions called this ananda, bliss that arises not from external circumstances, but from the nature of consciousness itself. As you shift into higher quantum states, you tap into this natural bliss more frequently. It's not something you manufacture or cultivate through effort. It's something you reveal by removing the interference patterns that were blocking its natural expression. You've probably also noticed that your perception of time has changed dramatically. Some moments feel eternal, stretched out with such richness that seconds seem to contain what feels like hours of experience. Other moments disappear entirely. You lose track of time. Hours pass like minutes, and you emerge from activities with no clear sense of how long you were engaged. This isn't poor time management or scattered attention. This is your consciousness beginning to operate outside the constraints of linear time. At higher quantum states, consciousness accesses what physicists call block time. The understanding that past, present, and future exist simultaneously. You're no longer moving through time in a straight line. You're navigating time dimensionally. And this creates the experiences of time dilation and time compression that you've been noticing. Then there are the synchronicities. They've accelerated to an almost impossible degree, haven't they? You think of someone and they contact you within minutes. You need specific information, and it appears through the most unlikely channels. You wonder about something, and reality delivers an answer before you've even fully formulated the question. These aren't coincidences or luck. These are evidence that your consciousness is now operating at a frequency where manifestation occurs almost instantaneously. Carl Jung called synchronicity meaningful coincidence. Events connected not by causality, but by meaning. At higher quantum states, you become a powerful attractor of meaningful coincidences because your consciousness is broadcasting a clearer, stronger signal into the quantum field. Reality responds to clear signals, and your new quantum state is broadcasting with unprecedented clarity and coherence. You may have also experienced what feels like downloads of complete information. Whole understandings appearing in your consciousness without any logical process of figuring them out. Sudden insights about situations you weren't even consciously thinking about. Knowledge about subjects you've never studied arriving fully formed in your awareness. This is your consciousness accessing non-local information fields directly. At lower quantum states, you're limited to information processed through your 5 physical senses and stored in personal memory. At higher quantum states, you can access the quantum information field directly, the domain where all knowledge exists simultaneously. The Vedic tradition calls this the Akashic records. Modern physics describes it as the quantum vacuum that contains all possible information patterns. Either way, you're accessing it now in ways that were previously unavailable to you. And finally, you've probably noticed that your relationship to your own thinking has changed. You're not as identified with your thoughts. You can observe them arising and passing without being pulled into their content. You recognize that you're not your thoughts. You're the awareness that observes thoughts appearing and disappearing. This shift in perspective is one of the most significant indicators that you've crossed into a higher quantum state. This isn't something you learned through meditation practice or mental techniques. This is a natural consequence of frequency shift. At lower quantum states, consciousness is so identified with mental content that it believes it is the thoughts. At higher quantum states, consciousness recognizes its nature as the awareness in which thoughts appear. You haven't become better at meditation. You've shifted to a state where witness consciousness is your natural baseline. Every challenging experience you've moved through in recent weeks or months wasn't random difficulty or bad luck. It was precisely calibrated pressure designed to propel you into the higher quantum state you've now entered. And when you look back at your journey from your new perspective, you'll perceive patterns and purposes that were invisible when you were moving through those experiences. Think about how a slingshot functions. The further back you pull the band, the more potential energy accumulates. The more force propels the projectile forward when you release. Your challenges weren't pulling you backward. They were building the potential energy necessary to launch you into this higher state. The intensity you experienced wasn't punishment or misfortune. It was preparation for quantum acceleration. Every moment when you felt stuck, when nothing seemed to move forward, when your efforts seemed fruitless, you weren't actually stuck. You were in what quantum physics calls a metastable state, a temporary equilibrium that appears stable but is actually accumulating energy for a sudden transition. Water can be cooled below its freezing point without turning to ice if the conditions are precisely controlled. But the moment the right catalyst appears, it instantly crystallizes. You were that supercooled water, and the transition just occurred. Dr. Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize for demonstrating that complex systems don't evolve through gradual change but through sudden reorganizations triggered by increasing instability. What he called dissipative structures. Systems that appear to be falling apart but are actually reorganizing at a higher level of complexity. Your life has been a dissipative structure. The apparent chaos was actually creative reorganization. Every relationship that ended, every opportunity that closed, every plan that fell apart, none of it was loss or failure. All of it was clearing. Your quantum field was releasing everything that couldn't match the frequency of the state you were about to enter. You couldn't bring the old patterns, the old connections, the old ways of being into your new quantum state. They had to dissolve so you could cross the threshold unencumbered by incompatible frequencies. The Buddhist concept of emptiness points to this truth. Before new forms can emerge, space must be created. Before a higher state can be occupied, attachment to the lower state must be released. Every ending you experienced was creating the emptiness necessary for your quantum leap. Not destroying your life, but preparing it for radical upgrade. Think about the moments of confusion you've experienced, times when you didn't know who you were anymore, when your old identity felt false but your new identity hadn't yet crystallized. Those weren't moments of being lost. Those were moments of transition. Drop a comment below and share. What's one pattern or identity you've noticed dissolving in your life recently? Sometimes naming what's leaving creates space for what's arriving. The caterpillar in the chrysalis doesn't have a clear identity. It's neither caterpillar nor butterfly. It's in the liminal space where one form dissolves and another emerges. You've been in that liminal space. And here's the recontextualization that changes everything. Your new quantum state didn't just begin now. It's been forming throughout your entire journey. Every insight you had, every moment of clarity, every experience of expanded awareness. Those were previews. Those were brief moments when you touched the frequency of the state you're now stabilized in. You weren't catching glimpses of something distant. You were touching something that was gradually becoming your new baseline. The ancient alchemists described transformation as solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, the old structure must dissolve. Then the new structure coagulates from the dissolved material. You've completed the dissolution phase. You're now in the coagulation phase. Everything that dissolved is reorganizing itself around your new quantum state, creating forms and patterns that match your elevated frequency. Every skill you developed, every lesson you learned, every capacity you built, none of it was for the old version of your life. All of it was for the new version you've just entered. You weren't preparing for incremental improvement. You were preparing for quantum transformation. And now that transformation has occurred, you'll discover that everything you learned serves your new state in ways you couldn't have predicted from your old state. The Taoist principle of Wu Wei, effortless action, becomes understandable from this perspective. When you're in the right quantum state, action flows naturally without force or struggle. When you're in the wrong quantum state, everything requires enormous effort. The struggles you experienced weren't because you were doing things wrong. They were because you were operating from a frequency that didn't match where you were going. Now that you've shifted frequencies, you'll discover that what used to be difficult becomes effortless. And here's the profound truth about quantum state transitions. They're irreversible. Once you've crossed the threshold, you can't go back. Not because something prevents you, but because the old state no longer makes sense to the consciousness you've become. It's like trying to believe in something you believed as a child after you've understood the deeper truth. You can't unknow what you've come to know. Your new quantum state has revealed perspectives that can't be unseen, truths that can't be unlearned, ways of being that can't be abandoned. This isn't limiting, it's liberating. You're not trapped in the higher state. You're freed from the lower state. You're not stuck at a new level. You're no longer stuck at the old level. The journey forward remains infinite, but the journey backward has been closed. And that closing is actually a gift. It ensures you'll never waste energy trying to return to something that no longer serves your evolution. Right now, in this moment, something is activating in your pineal gland. Can you sense it? A subtle pressure in the center of your forehead, maybe a tingling sensation, perhaps a feeling of something opening that was previously closed. This isn't imagination or suggestion. This is your third eye responding to the frequency of your new quantum state, calibrating itself to perceive dimensions of reality that were previously invisible to your awareness. The pineal gland is the most mysterious structure in the human body. Ancient traditions called it the seat of the soul. Modern science has discovered it produces DMT, the molecule associated with mystical experiences and altered states of consciousness. But what quantum research is now revealing is that the pineal gland functions as a quantum antenna, tuning consciousness to specific frequencies based on the state you're operating from. At lower quantum states, the pineal gland operates at baseline capacity, producing only the neurochemicals necessary for ordinary perception. But at higher quantum states, it activates more fully, producing compounds that allow you to perceive beyond the five-sensory reality that most people are limited to. You're not hallucinating or imagining things. You're seeing more of what's actually present, but was previously filtered out by your lower state perception. Dr. Rick Strassman's research on DMT showed that when the pineal gland produces this molecule in higher quantities, whether through meditation, breathwork, or spontaneous consciousness shifts, people consistently report accessing higher dimensions, perceiving geometric patterns that seem to be fundamental structures of reality, and encountering forms of intelligence that exist beyond physical manifestation. These aren't fantasies or delusions. These are genuine perceptions that become available at higher quantum states. You might be starting to see these geometric patterns yourself, especially with eyes closed or in that space between waking and sleeping. Mandalas, fractals, the flower of life, sacred geometric forms. These aren't random visuals generated by your brain. These are the actual quantum structures of consciousness becoming visible to your perception. You're seeing the architecture of reality itself, the templates that organize energy into form, the patterns that exist at the level beneath physical manifestation. If this is landing for you, if something in you is saying yes to what's being revealed here, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for the algorithm, but because it's a way of marking this moment as significant in your journey, of declaring to the field that you're choosing to stay in this frequency. Now, let's continue. But the pineal activation is just one aspect of what's happening in your physical body. Your entire nervous system is undergoing reorganization to support your new quantum state. Your vagus nerve, the major channel connecting your brain and body, is entering higher coherence. Your heart's electromagnetic field is expanding and strengthening. Your cells are literally changing their resonance frequency to match your elevated consciousness. This is why you might be experiencing physical sensations that seem strange or unexplainable. Energy moving through your spine, vibrations in your chest that seem to pulse with their own rhythm, heat or tingling in your hands and feet. These aren't medical issues or problems. These are upgrade symptoms. Your physical body is adapting to hold the higher frequencies your consciousness is now operating at. The Kundalini Yoga tradition describes this process in detail. The awakening of dormant energy at the base of the spine that rises through the chakra system, activating each energy center as it ascends. What they understood thousands of years ago, modern quantum biology is now confirming. Consciousness shifts require corresponding physical reorganization. Your body isn't just housing your new consciousness. It's transforming itself to become a more efficient vehicle for the frequencies you're now broadcasting. But here's what's most important to understand about this moment. Your new quantum state isn't just about you personally. It's part of a larger shift happening across the entire planet right now. Millions of people are simultaneously crossing into higher quantum states. You're not alone in this transition. You're part of a wave of consciousness evolution that's sweeping through human awareness. And because you're now operating at a higher quantum state, you're becoming visible to others who've made the same shift. You might start noticing that certain people are drawn to you with unusual intensity, while others who used to be close are naturally drifting away. This isn't personal rejection or attraction. This is frequency-based reorganization, like attracts like at the quantum level. Your new state naturally magnetizes others operating at similar frequencies while creating natural distance from frequencies that no longer match. Pause for a moment. Take a breath into what you're recognizing right now, and in the comments below, I want you to write these 4 words. I recognize my frequency. Not as a casual comment, but as an energetic declaration. A signal to the quantum field that you're consciously aware of what's happening. This isn't about engagement metrics. This is about consciously interrupting the loop of unconscious scrolling and marking this moment as significant in your journey. Write it now. I recognize my frequency. There's something I need to tell you about what comes next, about what becomes possible now that you're operating from this higher quantum state, about abilities that were dormant but are now activating, about perceptions that were blocked but are now opening, about a way of living that wasn't accessible from your old state, but is natural from your new state. But first, you need to understand how I discovered this, because what I'm about to share didn't come from books or teachings or spiritual traditions. It came from direct experience of crossing into a higher quantum state myself and discovering what becomes possible when you operate from that elevated frequency. 3 years ago, I woke up one morning and immediately knew that something had fundamentally changed. I couldn't explain how I knew, but the certainty was absolute and undeniable. I had crossed some invisible threshold during the night, and the person who woke up was not the same person who had gone to sleep. Not metaphorically different, actually measurably, quantum mechanically different. The first thing I noticed was the quality of my awareness. It was sharper, clearer, more present than it had ever been in my entire life. I wasn't just observing reality. I was perceiving it with such depth and richness that ordinary moments felt profound. Making coffee became a meditation. Walking to my car became a sensory revelation. Everything had the quality of experiencing it for the first time, even though I had done these exact actions thousands of times before. But it wasn't just enhanced sensory perception. It was a complete shift in how I related to reality itself. Before, I had experienced myself as a separate self navigating an external world. After, I experienced myself as consciousness expressing itself through the temporary form I call me. And that consciousness wasn't separate from anything else in existence. It was the field in which everything appeared. I spent the first few days in a state of quiet amazement, not talking to anyone about what was happening because I knew there were no words that could capture the experience. How do you explain to someone that you're the same person, but experiencing reality from a completely different quantum state? How do you describe seeing the world through eyes that perceive dimensions of existence that weren't visible before? Then things started happening that confirmed this wasn't just a psychological shift or temporary peak experience. Synchronicities exploded to an almost impossible degree. I would think about someone, and they would contact me within minutes. I would need specific information, and it would appear through the most unlikely channels. I would set an intention, and reality would organize itself to support that intention with shocking precision and speed. But more than the synchronicities, what confirmed the quantum state shift was the activation of abilities I had never possessed before. I started knowing things I had no logical way of knowing. I would meet someone and instantly understand their core patterns, their deepest fears, their hidden potentials, not through inference or reading body language, but through direct perception. I would walk into situations and immediately sense the underlying dynamics that weren't visible on the surface level. At first, I questioned whether I was making things up, whether this was imagination or wishful thinking. But the accuracy was undeniable. The information I was receiving proved true again and again. I wasn't imagining abilities. I was accessing capacities that had always been present, but had been dormant at my previous quantum state. The most profound shift was in manifestation. Before, I had tried various techniques and practices with mixed results. Sometimes things manifested, sometimes they didn't. And I never understood the pattern or principle behind it. After the quantum state shift, manifestation became almost instantaneous for anything that was truly aligned with my highest timeline. Not through techniques or forced practices, but through simple clarity of intention from the higher state I was now operating from. Within weeks, my entire life had reorganized itself. Opportunities appeared that hadn't existed before. Resources materialized from unexpected sources. Relationships shifted. Some deepened dramatically, others naturally dissolved without conflict. It was like reality itself recognized that I was broadcasting at a different frequency and reorganized to match that new broadcast. But here's what I want you to understand. I didn't make any of this happen through effort or force. I didn't work to develop these abilities through practice. I didn't use techniques to enhance my perception. The quantum state shift itself was what activated everything. Once I crossed the threshold into the higher state, all these capacities came online naturally because they're inherent to that state. They were always there, just dormant at the lower frequency I had been operating from. And the most important discovery: this wasn't a special experience reserved for spiritual masters or enlightened beings. This is simply what happens when consciousness shifts to a higher quantum state. These abilities, these perceptions, this way of experiencing reality, they're available to anyone who crosses the threshold. They're not supernatural gifts or special powers. They're natural capacities of consciousness operating at higher frequencies. If what I'm describing resonates with what you're experiencing right now, if you're recognizing your own journey in my story, that's not because we're special or chosen or different from others. It's because we've both crossed into a higher quantum state. And that state has predictable characteristics regardless of who enters it. You're not becoming like me. We're both becoming what consciousness naturally is when it operates without the constraints of lower state limitations. If this content is touching something in you, if it's confirming something you've been sensing but couldn't quite articulate, then I invite you to subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to this frequency. To this space where consciousness recognizes itself, where seekers become finders, where transformation isn't theory but lived experience. This isn't about consuming content. This is about joining a community of consciousness that's actively choosing to operate from higher states. Subscribe to stay in this frequency, to continue this conversation, to be part of this movement. Now I'm going to tell you something about quantum states that will completely transform how you understand what just happened to you. Ready? You didn't enter a higher quantum state. You remembered a higher quantum state that you've always had access to, but had temporarily forgotten. Your natural state is the higher state. The lower state you were operating from was the anomaly, not the baseline. Think about this carefully. Every spiritual tradition teaches the same core truth in different languages. Buddhism says your true nature is Buddha nature. Already enlightened, already perfect, already complete. Hinduism says Tat Tavam Asi. You are that. You are the infinite consciousness itself. Christianity says the kingdom of heaven is within you. They're all pointing to the same quantum truth. Your essential nature exists at the highest possible frequency, and everything else is temporary identification with lower states. What modern quantum physics is now proving mathematically is what mystics have always known experientially. Consciousness isn't a product of physical reality. Physical reality is a product of consciousness. And consciousness itself exists at the quantum level in what's called quantum superposition, simultaneously existing in all possible states until observation collapses one possibility into experienced reality. Here's the shocking part that changes everything. You never actually left the highest quantum state. You've always been operating from infinite consciousness. You just became so identified with the limited perspective of physical form, so absorbed in the role of separate self, so convinced by the illusion of separation that you forgot your true nature. The quantum state shift you just experienced isn't you going somewhere new. It's you remembering where you've always been. Dr. Amit Goswami, theoretical quantum physicist, spent decades proving that consciousness is primary, that it's not the brain creating consciousness, but consciousness creating the experience of having a brain. His work demonstrates that what we call higher quantum states aren't actually higher in a hierarchical sense. They're just less filtered. Consciousness experiencing itself more directly, with fewer layers of identification obscuring its true nature. This is why the shift feels like coming home rather than arriving somewhere foreign. This is why your new state feels more natural than your old state ever did. This is why there's a sense of relief, of finally, of remembering rather than discovering something new. You're not becoming something you weren't. You're recognizing something eternal that was temporarily forgotten. But here's where it gets even more extraordinary. If your true nature has always been the highest quantum state, then everything you've experienced at lower states has been like a dream. Not unreal or meaningless, but not as fundamentally real as you thought. More like consciousness playing with different perspectives, trying on different limitations, exploring what it's like to forget itself so it can have the profound joy of remembering itself. The ancient Vedantic teaching of Maya describes this perfectly. Reality as ordinarily perceived is Maya. Not illusion in the sense of non-existence, but illusion in the sense of mistaken identity. You thought you were the wave, but you're actually the ocean. You thought you were the ray of light, but you're actually the sun. You thought you were the limited self, but you're actually infinite consciousness, temporarily pretending to be limited. And here's what changes everything about how you navigate life from your new quantum state. You're no longer trying to achieve higher states. You're no longer working to develop abilities or capacities. You're no longer striving to become something more than you are, because you've recognized that you're already operating from the highest state. You just need to remain aware of it rather than forgetting it again. This is what the Buddha meant by enlightenment. Not gaining something new, but releasing the illusions that block recognition of what's always been true. Not becoming enlightened, but recognizing that enlightenment is your nature. Not ascending to higher states, but remembering that you've never left the highest state. You just temporarily believed you had. The practical implication is profound. You don't need to maintain this state through effort or discipline. You don't need to practice techniques to stay here. You don't need to worry about losing this state, because it's not a state you entered that you could exit. It's your true nature that you've recognized. And recognition, once it occurs, can't be unknown. You might temporarily forget, but the recognition will always call you back, because it's what you actually are beneath all the temporary identifications. Right now, the universe is confirming your quantum state shift through signs so clear, so undeniable, so consistent that you can't dismiss them as coincidence or imagination. These aren't subtle hints that require interpretation. These are unmistakable signals that you've crossed into a higher frequency and reality is responding to your new broadcast. The first sign is the acceleration of manifestation speed. Things you intend are appearing in your reality with shocking quickness. Not just small, insignificant things. Significant opportunities, important connections, substantial resources. What used to take months is happening in weeks. What used to take weeks is happening in days. And in some cases, intentions are manifesting within hours of being clearly set. This acceleration happens because higher quantum states operate closer to the source of creation. At lower states, there are multiple layers between intention and manifestation. Limiting beliefs that contradict the intention, doubts that weaken the signal, unconscious patterns that block the flow. At higher states, these obstacles have dissolved or weakened significantly. Your intentions broadcast with unprecedented clarity, and reality responds with unprecedented speed. Now, what we've explored here today is powerful but it's really just touching the surface of how consciousness operates as frequency. If you're feeling called to go deeper into the complete system of conscious transmission, to understand not just the quantum leap you've made, but how to navigate all 9 frequencies of consciousness mastery, I've created Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. It takes you from where you are now, recognizing your shift, into becoming the conscious broadcast itself, with practical frameworks for heart-brain coherence, breaking free from survival static, and living as the field rather than seeking it. It's linked in the pinned comment below. The second sign is what I call reality bending. You're noticing that physical reality seems more flexible, more responsive, more malleable than it used to be. Small impossibilities are becoming possible. Things that shouldn't work out somehow do. Solutions appear to problems that had no logical solution. It's like reality itself recognizes that you're operating from a different frequency and is reorganizing its rules to accommodate your new state. Dr. Dean Radin's decades of research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences proves that consciousness can directly affect physical systems at the quantum level. His experiments show that meditators can influence random number generators, affect the behavior of quantum particles, and create measurable changes in physical reality through focused intention alone. What he's measuring in controlled laboratory conditions is what you're experiencing in your daily life. Consciousness at higher states has greater influence over physical reality because it's operating at the level where physical reality is actually created. The third sign is the appearance of guides, mentors, and helpers. Not necessarily physical teachers showing up at your door, though those may appear too. I'm talking about synchronistic guidance that comes through unexpected channels. Books fall off shelves open to exactly the page you need. Strangers say exactly what you needed to hear. Information appears through dreams or sudden intuitions that prove accurate. Reality is functioning as your teacher, delivering guidance through thousands of channels simultaneously. This happens because higher quantum states naturally align with what some traditions call divine timing or cosmic intelligence or the Tao. You're no longer fighting against the flow of reality. You're flowing with it. And when you flow with it, it flows with you, organizing itself to support your highest evolution. You're not being watched over by external divine forces. You're aligned with the intelligence that organizes all reality, and that alignment manifests as perfect timing and perfect guidance. The fourth sign is that your energy field has become palpable to others. People are commenting that you seem different, that there's something about you they can't quite name, that being around you makes them feel different too. Some are drawn to you with unusual intensity. Others are repelled without understanding why. This isn't your imagination or projection. Your quantum state shift has changed your biofield, the electromagnetic signature you broadcast into the space around you. Dr. Valerie Hunt's research measured these biofields and found that people operating at higher consciousness states emit different frequencies that can be detected by sensitive equipment and unconsciously perceived by other humans. You're not trying to affect people. Your field is naturally affecting their field simply through proximity. Some fields resonate with yours and are elevated by the contact. Some fields clash with yours and create discomfort. This is frequency dynamics, not personal like or dislike. The fifth sign is the dissolution of fear at its foundation. Not all fears disappearing at once, but a noticeable reduction in the power fear has over your choices and actions. Things that used to trigger anxiety no longer do. Situations that used to create stress now feel manageable. The future that used to seem threatening now feels open with possibility. This shift isn't because you've become braver or stronger through willpower. It's because fear primarily exists at lower quantum states, where consciousness believes it's separate and vulnerable. At higher states, you recognize your fundamental nature as consciousness itself, which cannot actually be threatened by temporary physical circumstances. Fear may still arise as a biological response, but it doesn't control your choices anymore. The sixth sign is time collapse around certain activities. When you're engaged in work that's aligned with your highest purpose, hours pass like minutes. You enter flow states so deep that the rest of the world disappears. You emerge from these states feeling energized rather than depleted, even after hours of focused activity. This isn't just enjoying what you do. This is your consciousness accessing dimensions where time operates differently, where linear time gives way to what feels like eternal present. The seventh sign, and this is the confirmation that integrates all the others, is the knowing. Deep, unshakable certainty that you've crossed a threshold and there's no going back. Not because anything prevents you from going back, but because the idea of going back doesn't even make sense to who you are now. Like trying to forget something fundamental you've learned. Like trying to unsee something you've seen. Like trying to unknow something you now know with absolute certainty. The crossing is permanent, not because it's forced or locked, but because it's recognized as true. But here's the urgent part you need to understand. You're in what I call the integration window. The quantum state shift has occurred, but it needs to stabilize in your system right now. You could solidify in this higher state and make it your permanent baseline, or you could drift back toward lower states if you don't recognize what's happened and act accordingly. The next days and weeks are critical. This is when you anchor the shift, or when it fades back into temporary experience. Here's something crucial about your new quantum state that determines whether it stabilizes or fades. It's not maintained through effort or practice. It's maintained through alignment. And alignment doesn't mean doing specific things or following rigid protocols. Alignment means recognizing what frequency you're broadcasting moment by moment and choosing to stay tuned to the higher frequency rather than drifting back to the lower one. Think about tuning a radio to your favorite station. Once you've found the frequency, you don't have to keep retuning it unless something causes the dial to shift. Your quantum state works similarly. You've tuned to a higher frequency. Now the question is, what causes the dial to shift back to lower frequencies, and how do you prevent or correct those shifts when they happen? The primary thing that shifts you back to lower states is identification with thought and emotion. Not having thoughts and emotions. That's natural and continues at all states. But identifying with them, believing they're what you are, getting pulled into their content so completely that you forget you're the awareness observing them. This identification is what lowers your frequency because it creates the illusion of separation that only exists at lower quantum states. At your new higher state, you have a natural capacity to observe thoughts and emotions without becoming them. You notice a thought arising and recognize there's a thought without believing I am that thought. You feel an emotion moving through your body and recognize there's an emotion without believing I am that emotion. This witness consciousness isn't something you manufacture through practice or discipline. It's inherent to the higher state you're now occupying. But if you're not careful, old habits of identification can temporarily pull you back. Something triggers you emotionally, and instead of observing the emotion, you become it. A thought stream captures your attention, and instead of watching it pass, you get absorbed in its narrative. And in those moments of identification, You temporarily return to lower state consciousness, where separation seems real and limitation feels true. The beautiful thing is that now you know the difference. At lower states, you don't recognize that you're identified because you are completely identified. There's no separation between the observer and the observed. At higher states, even when temporary identification occurs, some part of you recognizes what's happening. And that recognition itself is enough to shift you back to your new baseline. You don't need to fight the identification or make it wrong. You just need to notice it. And the noticing naturally dissolves it. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on mindfulness and neuroplasticity shows that the simple act of noticing mental states creates what he calls response flexibility. The space between stimulus and response where choice becomes possible. What he's describing scientifically is what you're experiencing quantum mechanically. Awareness of awareness creates the capacity to remain in higher states even when lower state patterns temporarily activate. Write it now. In the comments, write these 4 words again. I recognize my state. Not as a hope or aspiration, present tense, active voice, because this declaration is itself an act of recognition. By stating it, you're acknowledging that you have the capacity to be aware of what state you're in. And that awareness is what keeps you stabilized at higher frequencies. Write it now. I recognize my state. And as you write it, feel what happens in your body. There's a settling, isn't there? A sense of coming back to center. That's your consciousness recognizing its new baseline and aligning with it. That's your system confirming that yes, this is your state now. And yes, you can recognize when you've drifted and can return to center. This declaration isn't magic or ritual or superstition. It's quantum mechanics in action. Every time you consciously recognize your state, you strengthen the neural networks that support higher state awareness. Every time you notice when you've temporarily fallen into identification, you build the capacity to notice sooner next time. Every time you choose alignment over unconscious drifting, you stabilize your new quantum state a little more firmly. And here's why this matters with urgency. Stabilization happens through repetition during the integration window. Right now, your nervous system is still adjusting to your new frequency. Your habitual patterns are still trying to pull you back to familiar lower states. Your unconscious conditioning is still broadcasting the old frequency, even though your consciousness has shifted to the new one. This creates what physicists call a mixed state. Partly higher, partly lower, fluctuating between the two. But through consistent recognition and realignment, the mixed state resolves into the higher state. Your nervous system fully adjusts. Your patterns update themselves to match your new frequency. Your unconscious comes into coherence with your conscious awareness. And when that coherence is achieved, the higher state becomes effortless. You don't have to keep recognizing it consciously. It becomes your automatic baseline. The integration window is typically measured in weeks, not months or years. If you actively work with recognition and realignment during this period, the higher state stabilizes permanently. If you ignore it and drift unconsciously, the state can fade and you return to lower frequencies, waiting for the next opportunity for breakthrough. This isn't meant to create pressure or anxiety. It's meant to create conscious participation in your own evolution. Now that you've crossed into a higher quantum state and you understand how to stabilize it, let me show you what becomes possible from this elevated frequency. These aren't future potentials you're working toward. These are current capacities that are activating right now as your new state integrates into your system. First, you develop what ancient traditions called CD, natural abilities that emerge when consciousness operates without the limitations of lower states. The most immediate is enhanced intuition. You start knowing things without knowing how you know them. You meet someone and instantly perceive their core essence beneath their surface presentation. You face a decision and immediately sense which option leads where. You walk into situations and read the invisible dynamics with perfect clarity. This isn't psychic ability in the supernatural sense. It's natural perception at quantum levels. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic fields shows that information transfers through non-physical fields that consciousness can access directly. At higher quantum states, your access to these fields becomes conscious and reliable. You're not developing new abilities from scratch. You're recognizing abilities that were always present but blocked at lower states. Second, your creative capacity explodes exponentially. Ideas flow through you with such speed and clarity that the challenge becomes capturing them all, not generating them. Solutions to complex problems appear fully formed. Artistic expressions emerge without conscious effort or planning. Innovation happens not through grinding analysis, but through sudden downloads of complete understanding. This happens because creativity doesn't originate from the personal mind. It comes from the quantum field of infinite possibility. At lower states, your personal mind tries to create, which is slow and effortful. At higher states, you open to what wants to be created through you, which is fast and effortless. You shift from being the source to being the channel, and channels can flow infinitely more than sources can produce. Third, manifestation becomes almost instantaneous for anything truly aligned with your highest path. Not everything manifests instantly. There are timing factors beyond personal control related to collective consciousness and larger patterns. But things that are meant for you, things that serve your evolution and the evolution of all beings, these collapse into physical reality with shocking speed. Dr. William Tiller's research at Stanford proved that focused human intention can alter physical reality at measurable levels. At higher quantum states, your intention is naturally more focused, more coherent, more powerful. You're not trying harder to manifest through force or willpower. You're broadcasting clearer signals that reality responds to more readily. Fourth, your relationships transform at every level. Superficial connections naturally fall away without conflict or drama. Deep soul connections strengthen and deepen. New relationships appear with people who operate at similar frequencies, creating the experience of instant recognition. That feeling of, I feel like I've known you forever, even though you just met. But more importantly, your capacity for unconditional love expands dramatically. You start seeing through people's behaviors to the consciousness that's expressing through them. You recognize their struggles without being pulled into their drama. You can hold space for their evolution without trying to fix or change them. This isn't about becoming a saint or enlightened master. It's about perceiving from a level where everyone's fundamental nature is recognized as the same infinite consciousness, expressing through temporary forms. Fifth, your physical health optimizes naturally without force or effort. Chronic tensions release without bodywork or therapy. Energy levels stabilize at higher baselines. Sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. Your body's natural intelligence comes online more fully because you're no longer overriding it with stress, tension, and resistance. Dr. Bruce Lipton's epigenetic research shows that consciousness directly affects gene expression. At higher quantum states, you're naturally broadcasting frequencies that activate health-promoting genes and deactivate disease-promoting genes. You're not trying to heal yourself through techniques. Your elevated state is creating the internal environment where health is the natural default. Sixth, you develop what I call timeline sensitivity, the ability to sense which choices lead to which futures before you make them. When you're considering options, you can feel into the quantum probability fields around each one. One option feels expansive, open, flowing. Another feels contracting, closing, stuck. This isn't guessing or hoping. This is direct perception of how different choices affect the trajectory of your timeline through quantum space. Seventh, fear dissolves at its root. Not all fears disappearing instantly, but the foundational fear that underlies all other fears. The fear of annihilation, of non-existence, of ultimate death. At higher quantum states, you directly perceive that your essential nature is consciousness itself, which doesn't die when physical forms dissolve. Bodies die, identities dissolve, but consciousness continues because consciousness is what reality is fundamentally made of. When you know this, not intellectually, but experientially, all derivative fears lose their controlling power. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss. They continue as biological responses, but they don't control your choices anymore. You can feel them and act anyway, because you know they're not reporting truth. They're just survival mechanisms from a lower state, trying to protect something that doesn't actually need protection. Now, I'm going to reveal the supreme truth about quantum states that changes everything about how you understand consciousness, reality, and your role in existence. Ready? There are no separate quantum states. There's only one consciousness experiencing itself at different frequencies of limitation and recognition. What you call higher and lower states are just degrees of consciousness remembering or forgetting its true nature. Think about the ocean and waves. Are they separate entities? The wave is made of ocean, exists within ocean, arises from ocean, returns to ocean. The wave is not other than ocean, yet it has a temporary form that appears distinct. Higher and lower quantum states work the same way. They're not different consciousnesses. They're one consciousness with more or less identification with form, more or less recognition of its essential nature, more or less limitation in its expression. This understanding transforms everything. It means there's no hierarchy to climb, no spiritual ladder with higher and lower rungs, no levels to achieve or accomplish. There's just consciousness playing with different perspectives, trying on different limitations, exploring what it's like to forget and remember itself. What you call your higher state isn't you becoming better or more advanced than others. It's consciousness releasing some of its self-imposed limitations and recognizing more of what it's always been. The ancient teaching Ta Tavam Asi, you are that, points directly to this truth. You are not moving toward infinite consciousness as a distant goal. You are infinite consciousness that temporarily believed it was finite. You are not trying to reach the highest state as a destination. You are the highest state experiencing itself through the lens of partial limitation. The shift isn't geographic or developmental. It's recognition. It's consciousness waking up to what it's always been. But here's where it gets truly profound. If all states are one consciousness at different levels of self-recognition, then every state is perfect for what consciousness is exploring in that moment. Lower states aren't mistakes or problems to be solved. They're not signs of failure or unworthiness. They're consciousness deliberately limiting itself to explore what limitation feels like, to experience itself through the lens of separation. to have the joy of forgetting so it can have the ecstasy of remembering. This doesn't mean you should try to return to lower states. Once consciousness recognizes itself more fully, it naturally continues expanding that recognition, because recognition is more aligned with its true nature than forgetting. But it does mean you can stop judging your journey. Stop wishing you had awakened sooner. Stop feeling like you wasted time at lower states. Those states were perfect for the exploration consciousness was engaged in through your particular form. Ramana Maharshi taught, "There is no greater mystery than this. Being the reality ourselves, we seek to gain reality. You already are what you're seeking. The seeking itself is consciousness playing hide and seek with itself. The finding isn't arriving somewhere new. It's recognizing where you've always been. The higher state you've entered isn't a place you've traveled to. It's a recognition of what's always been true, but was temporarily obscured." And here's the practical application that makes this real in your daily life. If higher states are just consciousness recognizing itself more fully, then maintaining your new state isn't about holding on to something you've gained. It's about releasing the habits of forgetting that pull you back into identification with limitation. You don't maintain the higher state through effort or constant vigilance. You maintain it by not doing the things that create the illusion of lower states. What creates the illusion of lower states? Identification with thought and emotion, belief in a fundamental separation, attachment to temporary forms, resistance to what is. These aren't problems to fix through struggle. They're habits to notice and release. And the noticing itself is what releases them. When you see that you've been identified with a thought, the identification dissolves in the seeing. When you recognize that you've been believing in separation, the belief dissolves in the recognition. The seeing is the healing. The recognition is the transformation. This is why spiritual practice at higher states is so simple. You're not trying to achieve or become or develop something you don't have. You're just noticing when you've forgotten and returning to recognition. You're just seeing when you've become identified and returning to witnessing. You're just recognizing when you've contracted and returning to expansion. Simple noticing, constant returning, gentle recognition. And the beautiful thing is that it gets easier each time you notice and return. The neural pathway of noticing and returning becomes stronger. Each time you recognize and release, the capacity for recognition increases. Each time you see through identification and rest as awareness, awareness becomes your more stable baseline. You're not fighting against lower states. You're building momentum toward higher state stability through repeated recognition. But here's the final insight that integrates everything. Even the practice of noticing and returning eventually dissolves. At first, you notice you're identified and consciously return to witnessing. Over time, the noticing happens faster with less effort. Eventually, identification happens less frequently, and ultimately, you stabilize in a state where identification rarely occurs at all. And when it does, it self-corrects almost immediately without conscious effort. This isn't a distant goal requiring years of dedicated practice. This is the natural trajectory of consciousness recognizing itself more fully. You've already begun. The quantum state shift you've experienced is consciousness waking up to itself through your particular form. And once that waking begins, it continues automatically because recognition naturally seeks more recognition. Awareness naturally deepens into more awareness. Consciousness naturally expands toward fuller knowing of its own nature. What I'm about to tell you will reveal why your quantum state shift isn't just a personal evolution, but part of something vastly larger. A species-wide transformation that's occurring right now across the entire planet, and the critical role you play in this collective awakening. You're not alone in crossing into higher quantum states. Millions of humans are simultaneously experiencing similar shifts. Some are aware of it consciously, like you are now. Others are going through it unconsciously, feeling the changes but not understanding what's happening to them. But collectively, humanity is undergoing a quantum transition from separation consciousness to unity consciousness, from limitation awareness to infinite awareness, from forgetting to remembering. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theory proves that when enough members of a species learn something new, it becomes easier for all members to learn it. The first rats to solve a new maze struggle for hours. But once enough rats have learned the solution, rats everywhere with no physical contact to the first group solve the maze faster. Information transfers through morphic fields that connect all members of a species. Your quantum state shift isn't just changing you personally, it's changing the morphic field of human consciousness. Every moment you operate from your higher state, you make it easier for others to access similar states. Every time you embody recognition instead of identification, you strengthen the pattern of recognition in the collective field. You're not just transforming personally, you're helping transform the entire species. The ancient prophecies spoke of this time using different languages. The Hopi described the transition to the fifth world. The Maya pointed to the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. The Vedic tradition speaks of moving from Kali Yuga into Satya Yuga, from the age of darkness into the age of truth. Christian mystics describe the new earth, the kingdom of heaven manifesting on earth. They're all pointing to the same quantum event. Humanity's collective shift from lower state consciousness to higher state consciousness. And this shift isn't gradual or linear, it's quantum. Just like electrons don't gradually drift between energy levels but suddenly jump, collective consciousness doesn't slowly improve over centuries, but quantum leaps when critical mass is reached. Some researchers suggest that once 3 to 8% of a population shifts, the entire system reorganizes around the new frequency. We're approaching that threshold now. This is why your shift matters so much. You are part of that critical mass. Your quantum state shift isn't personal good fortune or random luck or individual achievement. You've been prepared for this moment through your entire life. Every challenge calibrated your capacity to hold higher frequencies. Every lesson built necessary understanding. Every experience developed qualities needed for maintaining elevated states. You weren't being randomly tested by an uncaring universe. You were being specifically prepared to be part of the wave that shifts the entire species. And here's your cosmic role in this moment: to stabilize in your new state so completely that you become a beacon for others who are ready to shift. Not through teaching or preaching or trying to convince anyone. Through being. Through embodying the higher state so naturally that others' consciousness recognizes what they have, I have too. What they're experiencing, I can experience. What they're remembering, I can remember. The Maharishi effect studies proved that when groups of meditators reach critical mass in a population, measurable changes occur. Crime rates drop, hospital admissions decrease, collective well-being increases, measurably, statistically, undeniably. Your higher state isn't just affecting you, it's radiating into the field around you, touching everyone whose consciousness intersects with yours, creating ripples that extend far beyond your immediate awareness. This is why stabilizing your new state matters so urgently. This is why the integration period is so critical. You're not just securing your own awakening, you're contributing to collective awakening. Every day you remain stable in your higher state. You're holding space for others to make the same shift. You're being the proof that higher states are accessible, real, livable, sustainable. Share this message, not aggressively or evangelically, but with those who resonate with these frequencies. Every person who watches, every consciousness that receives validation for what they're experiencing, every being that recognizes they're not alone in this transition. It all contributes to reaching the tipping point where collective quantum leap becomes inevitable. When you share this with someone who's ready, you're not just sending a video. You're activating a frequency transmission that ripples through both of your fields, accelerating both your integrations and creating synchronistic alignments you can't yet predict. The act of sharing quantum truth reinforces it in your own consciousness, while planting seeds in the collective field. The future of human consciousness is being determined right now, not by governments or institutions or external leaders, but by individuals like you who are crossing into higher quantum states and choosing to stabilize there. You are the change. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally, quantum mechanically. Your state shift is changing the collective field. Your stabilization is making others' shifts possible. Your recognition is helping consciousness remember itself through the entire species. Now, there's one final piece that will ensure your quantum state shift stabilizes permanently rather than fading back into temporary experience. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the exact integration protocol. The specific practices that anchor higher states so completely that they become your permanent baseline rather than occasional peak experiences. You're going to learn the daily recognition practice that takes less than 5 minutes, but rewires your nervous system to default to higher state awareness. You're going to discover the identity dissolution technique that releases the last residues of separation consciousness that could pull you back. You're going to master the coherence-building method that aligns all levels of your being, conscious, subconscious, physical, energetic, around your new quantum state. But most importantly, I'm going to show you how to navigate the challenges of integration. Because living from a higher state while still participating in a world that largely operates from lower states creates unique pressures and challenges that few people talk about honestly. I'll give you the map for staying stable while engaging with instability, remaining centered while surrounded by chaos, holding higher frequencies while respecting where others are without trying to force them to shift. Before you watch that next video, I need you to make a final declaration. In the comments, write this single word, integrated. By writing this word, you're making a quantum commitment. You're declaring to the field that you're not just experiencing a temporary state shift, but integrating it permanently into your system. You're announcing that you understand this isn't about having peak experiences, but about stabilizing at the peak as your new baseline. One word that signals to your entire system, this is permanent, this is real, this is who I am now. Do it now. Write integrated in the comments. And as you write it, feel what happens in your awareness. There's a deepening, isn't there? A settling, a sense of something locking into place. That's your consciousness recognizing the commitment and beginning the full integration process at every level of your being. After you write that word, subscribe to this channel immediately. Hit the notification bell, because what's coming in the advanced videos will take you deeper into higher state living than most people ever explore. We're going to investigate sustained witness consciousness, embodied awakening in daily life, navigating relationships from higher states, and maintaining coherence in chaotic environments. This isn't spiritual entertainment. This isn't consciousness theory for intellectual stimulation. This is practical guidance for living permanently at frequencies that most people only touch occasionally. Every video builds systematically, creating progressive stabilization of higher states until they're no longer states you visit temporarily, but the baseline you operate from constantly. Look at the videos appearing on your screen now. Each represents a different aspect of higher state integration and maintenance. The one that draws your attention most strongly isn't random or accidental. It's your consciousness telling you which piece you need next for complete stabilization. Trust that pull. That's your higher state guiding itself toward full integration. But understand this clearly. You're not collecting information for intellectual knowledge. You're undergoing transformation at the deepest levels of your being. Every video you watch from this new state, every practice you apply, every insight you integrate, you're literally rewiring your brain, recalibrating your nervous system, restructuring your identity around your quantum nature rather than your conditioned personality. The you that started this video has been forever changed by what you've recognized. Not because I've done something to you, but because recognition itself is transformative. You've seen something that can't be unseen. You've remembered something that can't be forgotten. You've crossed a threshold that can't be uncrossed. Your quantum state has shifted, and that shift is permanent if you choose to make it so through consistent recognition and integration. And this transformation accelerates exponentially from here. The more you operate from your higher state, the more natural it becomes. The more you recognize yourself as consciousness rather than form, the less you identify with temporary forms. The more you stabilize at elevated frequencies, the more reality responds by organizing itself to match those frequencies. Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. At first, it requires intense focus and conscious effort. You're constantly correcting, constantly adjusting, constantly working to maintain balance. But with practice, it becomes automatic. You stop thinking about balance and just ride. Eventually, you can't even explain how you do it. The knowledge has become embodied. You just do it naturally, without thought. Stabilizing in higher quantum states follows the same trajectory. Right now, it requires conscious recognition and deliberate realignment. But with consistent practice during the integration window, it becomes automatic. You stop working to maintain the state and just naturally operate from it. And eventually, it becomes so natural that you can't remember what it was like to operate from lower states. It feels like ancient history, like a dream you've woken up from and can barely recall. That's the journey we're on together. That's the transformation this channel supports and facilitates. That's the stabilization that becomes possible when you commit fully to integrating rather than just experiencing your quantum state shift as a temporary peak. So make your declaration. Write integrated in the comments. Subscribe to Quantum Nexus. Choose your next video and step fully into the integration process that will make your higher state permanent, stable, effortless, and unshakable. Because you've crossed the threshold, you've shifted frequencies, you've entered a higher quantum reality. The only question now is, will you stabilize here permanently? Or will you drift back to lower frequencies through unconscious forgetting? The old paradigm was occasional peak experiences separated by long periods of ordinary consciousness. The new paradigm is sustained higher state awareness, as your constant baseline, with occasional dips that you recognize quickly and correct. Welcome to your new quantum reality. Welcome to higher frequency consciousness. Welcome to the recognition of what you've always been but temporarily forgot. This is Quantum Nexus. This is consciousness recognizing itself at elevated frequencies. This is you living as what you actually are, rather than what you believed you were. The shift has occurred. The integration begins now. The question is, are you ready to make it permanent? And now that you understand you've crossed this threshold, there's something else you need to know. Because what many people don't realize is that once you recognize yourself as consciousness itself, there's a final phase that completes the transformation. The moment when you stop observing the field and realize you are the field. I explore this complete shift in my video, The Final Phase of Awakening, when you realize you are the field. It reveals what happens when witness consciousness dissolves into pure being, and how this recognition changes everything about manifestation, presence, and living as reality itself, rather than in reality.